Hi, I have a very simple question that I smile because most people don't know the answer. Most therapists don't know the answer. What is trauma? And people say, oh, if you're sexually abused, that's trauma. Oh, if you're physically abused, that's trauma. When I first, and there was no field of trauma, I was one of the early people that started the field of trauma. We know so much more today. That's what I thought trauma was: physical abuse, sexual abuse, being a victim in a guerrilla warfare, a horrible car accident. Trauma is any event that overwhelms our natural physical and emotional ability to process what's happening. Any event where the intellect, and it's automatic, says, oh, this could be a bit too much for me. The intellectual brain, if we put you in a CAT scan, actually turns off. This is not operating. So trauma is not symbolized because this puts words to what's happening. The experience is encoded in so many ways in the body. But things we don't think of trauma. For instance, I'm very happy to tell you that 2 years ago I moved to Sao Paulo after 50 years of living in New York. It was a very unconscious, conscious, contemplative, meditative decision to be here, to be part of ACT, and to be consistent with the work that we're doing in the Institute and training people. I lived in New York for 50 years. I had a magnificent apartment. I was choosing to leave it. It had actually become a burden because I was spending so much time here, and when you neglect an apartment that needs to be lived in, it takes more work. That was a loss. If I didn't process the loss of, I was choosing to move my life to Brazil, but if I didn't process that loss, it would have been a small trauma. If you have a pet, a dog or a cat or a bird or I don't know about fish. Maybe you get attached to fish. I had a client who was very attached to a snake. But if something happens to that pet, that loss is traumatic. Here we are in the pandemic. We think of death as, yeah, that could be traumatic. But you lost your identity when you lost your job. Or don't know whether you're going to have a job to go back to. We all thought that we knew how to deal with the world, more or less. Well, we lost our innocence, and that's traumatic. So notice that sounds intellectual when I say anything that overwhelms our natural abilities. I'll give you an example of a little tiny trauma. The other day I was at the gym, and in the next room there was the spinning class. And so there was the loud music and you could hear people spinning, and the instructor was yelling at the top of his lungs, that's right, you have to go faster, 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 faster. Now you may not realize it. I was able to talk to my trainer about it. We have a polyvagal system that either says it's okay, it's safe to engage and connect, or you know what, you may be in danger, shut down, become suspicious, protective. This could be traumatic. It operates automatically. And when somebody raises their voice like that, you immediately start to prepare for trauma. And I am having a conversation with the head of the gym to say, hey, it's all right for the spinning instructor to give instructions. When he screams, if people have any traumatic experience in their background, or once, especially if it's a male voice. Now, if I talk to you like this, almost like singing a wonderful Brazilian song, you will quiet down, you'll come into balance, and you will feel safe. And whatever is happening, you won't prepare for it to be traumatic, and it won't become traumatic. But if I raise my voice like that, you're in trouble. So these are the kind of things I can teach you around trauma, but we don't think of loss of innocence. Or I had a client, and every time he'd walk through the room, and he was from a little boy until he was like 25 when he started to see me, his father was a kind of depressed guy, and his father would just say, "Oh, it's you. You're not quite right." And he'd go back into his depression. Every time he saw his son, 3, 4, 5 times a day, "Oh, it's you. You're not quite right." That's traumatic. What do you end up thinking about yourself when your father is saying, "Oh, it's you. Not quite right"? Now we know the father was projecting about himself, he was depressed, and he was traumatizing his son. So what we have to realize about trauma too is that when you're treating trauma, you're in an energy field that's negative, you can get re-traumatized. And trauma is neurological, it's biological, it's in our muscles, it gets recorded in our bones. For instance, severe cases of arthritis can be the result of trauma, because what is arthritis but I'm frozen, the joints don't move. That's fear that can come from trauma. So what is trauma? Almost anything we don't have resilience to. And in today's world, which is challenging enough, and that's something that we can all do as therapists and as friends, we have to learn a lot about being resilient, because things that should traumatize us will. For instance, you're being traumatized every night that you turn on the news and listen to the number of people who died. Because most traumatic experiences have a beginning, a middle, and an end. You know, the World Trade Center had a beginning, a middle, and an end. The people who watched that video of the World Trade Center and heard about it on the news again and again and again had a much higher level of trauma. I was less than a kilometer and saw everything. I saw the buildings come down. I knew to find out what was happening, and I didn't watch the news. I read the newspaper because I can close the newspaper, and in print, it's not the same as the visual. And when I'm in a traumatic experience and it's visual, it has a beginning, a middle, and end. Now, when you watch the news, they show you again and again the workers at the hospital, people dying. This may be upsetting to you. They show you that we don't have enough graves dug, that we don't have any way of storing the bodies, but in this refrigerated train, you're being traumatized. So trauma is something that happens in many different ways on many different levels. You can have lots of little traumas, and then it's like an avalanche. Wow! Now we have a big trauma. And it can be little things, little things, little things, little things, and then it's a big trauma. And it's not just physical abuse or sexual abuse, a terrible car accident, or a diagnosis of cancer. It could be a very simple to treat and good prognosis, but as soon as the person says, "You have cancer," you're in trauma. Because cancer in the unconscious mind means I'm going to die. Now, many people have been diagnosed with cancer and they didn't die, but that's not how we're built as human beings. You don't say, "Oh, cancer, but that's a good prognosis, I'm going to go to the movies." So I hope I've given you an idea. What is trauma? Practically anything that overwhelms you if you don't have resilience in life to process it. And there are now, and there wasn't 30 years ago, and I could teach you because I've been through it all. I've been an international trainer. I'm postgraduate work as an expert in post-traumatic stress, war zones and prisons, and oh boy, I don't want to tell you the stories because they could traumatize you. I can teach you how to process your own trauma so you don't inhibit other people in expressing theirs. Because if you haven't touched your trauma, you're not going to let them really touch theirs because it's going to trigger you. And for you to realize we all need more and more resilience because we live in a world that's full of experiences that overwhelm us. That's what trauma is. When our natural resources, and sometimes life has left us with few resources and sometimes many, but when our natural resources aren't enough for us to maintain being present and process the experience in a functional way, that is trauma.